Welcome to the ACC Panic Room alongside Lauren Brownlow. I'm Joe Ovies on the road again. You know, pandemics, weddings, everything gets pushed back, everything bunched together. So I'm in California for another family wedding. The wedding was taking place at the same time as the NC State Mississippi State game, Lauren. And you know, I get my alerts and everything else. And did I see this right? 13 seconds into the game, it was already 7-0. What's going on here?
Yeah, opening kickoff. I feel like, I don't know, maybe that's just the Miami game bias creeping in for NC State back when Devin Hester did the same thing in the opening kickoff. But I had that kind of vibe. I'm like, oh no. And
Yeah.
You did kind of know after that, like you were like, okay, let me see how State responds. Because last year, State dealt with a lot of adversity and handled it very well, honestly. So I wasn't counting them out yet. But man, the first half, the offense just couldn't do anything after a little while. They would reach the red zone at first and then not be able to score. And then they just stopped being able to move the football at all. And it was a big mess. And listen, NC State defense, I just want you guys to know that I appreciate your efforts. Some of us watch the game and we understand scoring defense isn't fair necessarily.
This is true. This is true.
And I'm sorry, you guys.
Who made worse decisions last night? The NC State offense or me going in and out after
that seems like a great decision.
After the wedding? I don't know. This is like a midnight in and out run. I'm not quite sure if that was like the right thing to do. Just saying. Some decisions were made, right? Some decisions were made. As Andrew pointed out, choices were made on both sides. For sure. No, look, I think in catching up on the game this morning, I'm glad you brought up that point about the resiliency of NC State last year. And again, as I was kind of like watching this in real time on my phone, getting these updates, I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? It's on the road, little nerves, whatever. They'll get over that because this is essentially the same core group, more depth. Their defense was going to be their calling card. They'll settle down. And I think that's the disappointing aspect of it. Well, actually, It's disappointing. It's disappointing in two fronts. One, that the group that still found ways to stay competitive or find a way to win last year kept tripping over themselves. You know, whether it was, 1 of 3 in the red zone. It was too late, too late at that point. Coming up with a bunch of other empty trips on offense as well. They actually outgained Mississippi State in this game, but still, you can outgain them all day if you're not going to punch it in or you're not going to put points on the board. Like even like things like missed field goals, that's going to be a problem. So I think this is more a learning curve for Devin Leary, who, again, we've had a small sample size of Devin Leary. I think the optimism around Devin Leary is justified. I totally understand why people feel the way they feel about Devin Leary, but I also wonder if we still haven't seen enough of him, and he's still growing too. Because again, his season, which could have been nice last year, was cut short because of the injury. And this is supposed to be his first real full season, and going on the road in a hostile environment, SEC, all that stuff, might have been a little too big for NC State in this moment. They can bounce back from this, just like with North Carolina. We talked about North Carolina, Virginia Tech. You can bounce back from these games, but it certainly eliminates what could have been a really special start to the season with these losses.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, I think part of it for me too is like with NC State, just like with North Carolina, or similarly, we looked at their offensive line and we were like, okay, and especially with NC State, honestly, because I think there was a little more proven there in terms of what they were bringing back along their offensive line.
Oh, sure.
And, you know, they were bringing back too, which North Carolina didn't even do. They're bringing back running backs with a lot of experience and talent. They could not run the football yesterday, at all. And I think I had the similar feeling about their offensive line that I did about North Carolina's when they played against Virginia Tech, which is like, okay, wait, this team held its own, you know, against Texas A&M's main defense in the bowl game, offensive line wise. They did okay. And now they can't block Virginia Tech's offensive line. And by the way, they even struggled some yesterday with Georgia State's defensive line. You know, that's where we are. And I feel similarly about NC State, honestly. Like, it's like, okay, so you run the ball really well in the opener. You have these experienced backs. You have this offensive line. And I'm not saying that you're wrong about Devin Leary. I'm just saying it's really tough to go into that kind of environment and have to be the only source of offense, especially when nothing else is working.
It absolutely is. Again, I don't want it to make it sound like I'm knocking Devin Leary. I'm just saying that there's still a lot. It's the opposite of like the Sam Howell effect, right? We know what Sam Howell's capable of.
Sam Howell can win a game by himself.
He can win a game by himself. We've seen him do it in the fourth quarter
Right.
multiple times over 2 seasons prior to this year.
It's not a knock on a quarterback to say they can't win a game by themselves. It doesn't
Well,
mean
it's
they're
not
bad.
even it's not even necessarily that. We've seen Sam Howell consistently do it. We've had 2 full seasons of sample size with Sam Howell. There was a
Right.
justification for the way we talked about Sam Howell going into the year. With Devin Leary, it was simply the idea that he could, and we saw, again, small sample size of it. I'm not saying he still can't have a nice season, but I think this is another one of those cold splashes of water of reality for this NC State team. It's unfortunate that it has to happen on the road, and this gets to the larger issue with NC State. And I understand why State fans feel this particular way, because you've got 2 things happening at once. You can feel that Dave Doeren has built a pretty solid program at NC State over these years. And that's one thing that I've argued going back to his last contract extension. What's the alternative? Do you want to rip it up again and try another guy and then be here in the next 5 years? I mean, do you want to go down that pattern again? Give Dave Doeren an opportunity to go through another cycle. And that's what this year was about. I mean, heck, I don't know how many times Gilio and I talked about this entire offseason about how this is NC State's best team for Doeren since, 2017? At least that's the way it was discussed, especially with the defensive side. So if this is the next cycle and you feel confident about this year, here was this opportunity for Dave Doeren to get that signature Power 5 win, the ever elusive thing that State fans always point to when they talk about Dave Doeren. It's always a yeah, but. Well, he's got a solid program. Yeah, but where are those big signature wins? It's like that. You miss the highs and the lows of beating Clemson at Carter Finley Stadium one day, and then obviously the weird losses after that. And I think that's the one thing that, especially if you're Dave Doeren, you're looking at this going, damn, man, like at some point I'll have one of these wins that like I can point to say, yeah, this is what we've been building towards, and that was a missed opportunity at Mississippi State.
So the problem too is that I think we'll know more when we figure out what Mississippi State is. True. Because they were awful last year and they didn't look too great in their opener. Well, are they going to show improvement this year throughout the year? And maybe we'll look back on this and go, okay, not that it's like excusable, but will we look back on this and go, okay, it makes more sense in context? Or will we look back on this and go, okay, that's really bad? Do you know what I'm saying? So that's part of it too, because you cannot win those big games. And that's whatever. But at the same time, like, think about what some State fans would have said even if they won. Oh, it's just Mississippi State. They're not good. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
They want to beat the ranked teams. That's what they want to do.
I would have dismissed that because going on the road at SEC, it doesn't matter. I know what you're saying. Well, it's funny, too, because what you're talking about Mississippi State, let's see how this plays out the rest of the season, is very applicable to how we talked about North Carolina last week in their loss against Virginia Tech. We assumed that Virginia Tech wasn't going to be good for a variety of reasons.
Well, I thought they'd be good. I just didn't know how good.
Well, to me, it was always the ACC relationship, Justin Fuente and Virginia Tech, whether or not Justin Fuente was the right coach for Virginia Tech, right?
Right.
So Virginia Tech might actually turn out to be pretty damn good this year. They could be a coastal contender for all we know, and then we'll recontextualize that loss in Blacksburg. Same thing can be said for NC State. But until that happens, Lauren, I totally understand why people are just looking at this going, what it is
too is without the upsets, it's like when you do have these moments, like whether it's this one and I'm not even going to necessarily count the bowl game against Kentucky because they were without, State was without some guys.
Sure.
I'm not necessarily even going to count that, although it was a disappointing performance for that team. But like, it's like when you lose the games you shouldn't lose necessarily, or the games you could have won that were within reach, you just have less of a margin for error for those because you aren't like feeding the thirst of the fan base with the big wins or whatever. So that's where I think Dave gets like less leeway maybe in that department. But do I think it's fair? No, not necessarily. But at the same time, was I, as a media member who doesn't have anything invested in the outcomes of these games, screaming at my television and being mad at NC State after I talked them up for like the entire offseason and first 2 weeks of the season? Yeah, I was. I'm not mad. You know what though? I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
You're disappointed? Oh, that's such
and
a big.
I got my "You're Killing Me" Smalls shirt because
big mom energy, Brownlow.
I just want to love NC State, and I just.
Yeah. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the ACC Panic Room. I don't think I have another wedding to go to next weekend. That would be 3 weekends in a row with weddings. Anyway, I hope to actually be home for one weekend. We'll see you all then.